So a really funny thing happened to me this last week. And this was something that actually happened in all places in social media, particularly on Twitter. Now, if you're not following me on Twitter, you really should be. The address is Dragonfire Ideas. While I was perusing my Twitter feed at one point this past week, I kind of noticed, these are actually two people that I had never really come across before. I wasn't following either person. I think it was an exchange that somebody else that I was following had gotten involved in, but it was a young Christian fellow, and there was one of these internet atheists that was basically trying to pick on him. And so the topic of conversation had apparently started out as somebody saying that Christianity is a death cult, which is honestly one of the stupidest possible arguments that you could make. I mean, you're talking about a religion that offers its adherents eternal life, and you're going to turn around and suggest that it's a cult that worships death. That's kind of a really, really, really bad argument. And so somehow that got the person that had originally made this death cult argument really, really upset. And they basically stated that they were, they came out and they said that they were some sort of had like a religious studies PhD, and so of course their definition of a cult should have been accepted on that basis. And I thought it was very odd at the time that somebody who claims to be some kind of a religious studies scholar would be so upset by the academic definition of what a cult is. And now, for the record, the academic definition of cult basically holds that a cult is like the first stage, of the establishment of a religion. It starts as a cult. It starts as something that's kind of new and small, and other people consider their religious beliefs to be extremely unusual and almost threatening. And there's a lot of hostility, from established religions towards cults. So then after that, as it grows a little bit, becomes a little bit more established, makes its beliefs and its doctrines a little bit more sophisticated. Over time, a religion can grow into a denomination. And then if they're successful enough, they could even grow so large as to be an ecclesia. And so an ecclesia is kind of what happens when you have like a religion basically becoming like the official religion of a state. Now, in the case of Christianity, we're talking about an organization, it's a denomination that at times in history had been an ecclesia, but since then has kind of gone backwards and become a denomination again. And so, you see that these things, they don't just progress in one direction. They kind of move forwards and backwards. But there you have it. I mean, the whole idea of Christianity being a death cult, sorry, that's it's not on the table for any kind of an intellectually serious person. And if you're an academic making that kind of argument, then really the only thing that we know is that you're willing to actually kind of throw out all the established work just to kind of make one that, just to kind of make an argument that's much more emotionally pleasing to you. And so for the last week, that's kind of what my Twitter experience has been like. Internet atheists, they are a very diverse bunch. They're kind of diverse in their backgrounds, diverse in pretty much every way, including diverse in terms of their of their intellectual capacity. And the one thing about the least intelligent of them is that they are very apt to kind of try to come at people one at a time and just be like, oh, okay, this person tried and failed, so now I'm going to be the one to step up and tell this person what's what. And then, of course, after they've tried and they've failed, somebody else comes after you, and they don't seem to ever get any smarter, and their arguments don't ever seem to get any better. As much as there are a bunch of people that like to tell you how smart they are and how dumb religious people are, you hear some absolutely absurd things come out of their mouth. I think the most hilarious one that I heard over the last week, an internet atheist actually objected to the word belief. And this guy came out and he insisted, belief is accepting without evidence. We don't have beliefs because we don't accept things without evidence. But that's not what belief means. I mean, certainly, yes, belief can be accepting something without evidence, but belief doesn't preclude that somebody has accepted something with evidence. And of all the objections that an internet atheist could have, they could not pretend that they actually could show that there is evidence that there is no God. Just like, in my opinion, I don't think that any religious person could really show conclusive evidence that there is a God. They like to criticize religious people for accepting these things without evidence, but hey, I gotta be the one to break it to you. You're really no different. Now, they could certainly come out and say, it's like, well, if there's no evidence that God does exist, then that's evidence that God doesn't exist. No, that's absolutely not true. Because just because we're not aware of any conclusive evidence that God exists, doesn't mean that the evidence isn't there and we just don't have the ability to examine it. And the fact of the matter is that over history, humans have had all sorts of really flawed beliefs about things, not because that the evidence wasn't there to be seen, but because we didn't have the ability to see it. Remember, at various stages of human development in human history, we believed that sickness and disease, were the result of like demons or something. Because of course at that particular time we didn't know about viruses, we didn't know about microbes, we didn't know about bacteria. We didn't know about all these things that actually make people sick. Because all of the medical science and the technologies and everything that we've used to detect these things and prove their existence over the last few centuries, they hadn't been invented yet. They didn't exist. So yeah, we did believe, we did have these absolute absurd beliefs. They were not good beliefs, but we didn't know the difference as a species. We didn't know the difference because we didn't really have the means to know any different yet. I don't think that there's anything out there that rules out that maybe the same could be true about the existence, of a god or gods, or anything like that. The evidence of absence is not necessarily the absence of evidence. That's basic logic. But just as a thought experiment, I'd like to kind of imagine sometimes, if we could develop some kind of technology that did ever prove the existence of God, what would that technology be like? Like, just think about that. Think about how wild that would have to be. And I don't think that's anything that would ever, we would ever create deliberately. I don't think that we could ever really. You just kind of think about, the scope of existence, and to find something that, if it exists, is that so much transcendent beyond anything that we could perceive, to actually deliberately set out to create a science that could prove that. I think something like that would kind of have to happen by accident. Could you imagine if it did, though? Like all the way over in France, where they have that what was it, the Hadron Super Collider that everybody thought was going to destroy the world, and I think it came, if I'm not mistaken, it came online, but it didn't destroy the world, obviously. Could you imagine if they fired something like that up and just accidentally proved the existence of God? Just a bunch of guys sitting in a room, and all of a sudden there's just this thundering voice like, "Hey, what the fuck are you doing in my bathroom?" You're like, "What? Oh my God, what is that?" It's like, "Yeah, that's right. Fucking God. This is where I come to take a shit. What are you doing in here?" Oh wow! Like, could you imagine that? Like all of these all of these years and these billions of dollars and these hundreds of thousands of man hours of science of science and in actually like these these really these really ultra complex even theoretical fields, and then God just comes and takes a big old shit in the middle of the super collider. I'm just being like, yeah, this is where I do my business. Well, anyway, that took kind of a wild turn, I guess. But I guess the point that I would kind of like to come back to is that these internet atheists, you encounter enough of them, and it doesn't take very long to figure out that really what you're dealing with are a bunch of just kind of like very, very immature, kind of vainglorious people who really seem to, they really seem to get their jollies thinking that they're going to thwart other people's beliefs. And honestly, I think that they approach religious people the way that they do because it's basically the low-hanging fruit in their opinion. I mean, there's a stereotype of religious people, like they're not very sophisticated, they're not very intelligent. And so they think to themselves, we can go after these people, we can insult them, we can mock them, and they're so stupid that they can't fight back and they can't make a decent argument. But honestly, I would say that, like, of the internet atheists that I've encountered, I'd say that probably about 95% of them should take a really close look in the mirror before they think that way about anybody else. Because, man, some of y'all are just embarrassing.